Here we go.
There we go.
John Ford, this is such a pleasure. I couldn't have imagined that we would find ourselves talking like this. I still have a vivid memory of you. I mean, one has memories of friends and colleagues and things you've done. And one of my memories is when you and I turned up as the star attractions, I have to say, of the Bishop Council in Chichester. They wanted to hear from these up-and-coming firebrands who brought with them such theological depth intertwined with pastoral acuity, and that's why they asked you. I've forgotten why they asked me, but anyway, I was on the same double bill, and I remember we wowed, and I thought, wow, we're good, this Ford man and I. And if the Church of England is left to us, it'll be renewed and revamped in seconds. They just need to listen to our wisdom. And here we are, somewhere else. Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's nice to see you.
It's very nice to see you. You've been a very eminent bishop, however, unlike me. Tell the readers who have lived in a half world where they didn't met Father Ford where you've been.
Where I've been? Well, you and I were ordained. I think you were ordained deacon the day I was ordained priest in Southwark Cathedral.
1980. Yeah.
I was ordained deacon 79, priest in 80. I worked then as a curate in South London and then as the incumbent. And then I came to the Diocese of Chichester, where I was secretary to the bishop and a small country parish. Then I became diocesan missioner. And it was whilst I was diocesan missioner, I think that you and I did the double act
That's right.
the Bishop's Council, when we were trying to actually get the Bishop's Council to address important questions rather than tinkering around with the nuts and bolts of something that was safe.
Absolutely, yes.
That might have needed maintenance, but was not actually the real issue at all. And we might come back to that a little while, I think, because that's been a constant problem for me. The wrong questions being asked and so much time being spent on peripheral matters. And we gave I can't now remember what it was, but it was about how we should order the diocese for mission and ministry.
Yeah.
That's what it was about. And after that, I went to the cathedral and was on the staff there. And then I was to God's own, it wasn't a surprise to God, I suppose, but it was to me. I was called to be Bishop of Plymouth in the Diocese of Exeter, where I was for 7 years. And then I was elected to a diocese in Australia for another 7. And now I live in retirement in Horsham. And on Advent Sunday, just 3 weeks ago, not even 3 weeks ago, I was received into full communion with the Roman Catholic Church, and I am absolutely delighted to be there.
Oh, John, tell us about that. We can have a little spat, perhaps, or an argument, or whatever, about whether it's the Roman Catholic or just a Catholic Church. That'll be sort of, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, getting over our previous addiction and talking about our favourite tipple. But and you're probably right, and I'm probably wrong, but it doesn't matter. So, how does it feel to be
delightful? I'm so pleased and happy and relaxed. It's been a long journey to there.
Oh, for sure.
And it wasn't an easy, it wasn't even a step, it was a shuffle. Ultimately, no great chasm to jump. I went to talk to a priest who himself had been an Anglican 25 years ago. And he said to me at one point, he said, well, I don't know what it is I've got to tell you. And I said, well, that's up to you, isn't it? I mean, you need to tell me what you think I need to know. And he said, well, I think you probably know most of it already. And I said, well, I don't know about that. But, so it was a shuffle in the end.
I mean, you knew the theory and the ecclesiology because you and I have been thinking about when you were all, finish the sentence. You and I have been thinking about being Catholic, fully Catholic. Let's call it fully instead of Roman for the moment. You and I have been thinking when I was ordained, I really took parish in Birmingham. I literally carried around Newman's Apologia inside my jacket pocket because I was trying to read it. I didn't understand it very well, but even at that point, I'd started the journey of trying to make a conceptual bridge between where I was and this other thing, this
Yeah.
kind of absent parent figure that I didn't quite understand. So I mean, but so what's happened? I imagine what's happened to you is you knew the stuff, but what's the so? Tell us a bit more about the immediate experience of moving from knowing the stuff to being in the bath.
Well, the delight, and if I can put it just very baldly and very simply, which has got to be unpacked, I suppose, really, is that I can now go to Mass, and I can go to Mass wherever I am, and not have to have any other thoughts apart from what time it says on the notice board and making sure I get there. So, one of the things that in the end I knew I had to make the shuffle or the jump was, I just got so compromised when we went to visit the grandchildren, or you know, can I go? Is this? And now I know that
Yeah.
I go to Mass and I get fed by the body and blood of Jesus, and I don't have to think about it.
There isn't a
And
check. There isn't a checkbox with 25 boxes, all of
oh,
which have a different weighting that you need to go through in order to know on what basis you can present yourself to this liturgical event.
indeed, indeed. Now I know it's easy to say that, and I don't want to be too judgmental of where I was before, but I when I retired from Australia, in my diocese in Australia, I was able to concelebrate with every priest of the diocese. And that was a wonderful experience because, of course, that wasn't the case in Plymouth,
Right.
because there was always the compromise from the very beginning of my episcopal ministry uh, about this disregarded, or no, not disregarded, this kind of issue that's been put on the side to be dealt with at some point in the future, where you have within a diocese the impossibility of the interchangeability of ministry, which for me is just one of the issues about the unity of the church.
Mm.
You know, you, one of the joys of being now a Roman Catholic is that you know the priest is the priest, and it doesn't matter where they come from. There is a total interchangeability of ministry. There's no question of whether their orders are valid or not. This is where we are, and it's delightful, absolutely delightful.
That's the gift. I'd like to talk about the pain because I've been trying to explain it to other Catholics um, who are looking at Anglicans, thinking of coming over, not understanding why it's so difficult for them. And so you've described the gift, and there are lots more things to describe beyond what you've just said. But I think that for me, certainly, and for other people, there is a huge price to be paid. And that was as an Anglican, you got to make, so it's the flip side of checking tick boxes. You've got to make you've got to make your mind up about certain things. Do I assent to this? What weighting do I give to that?
Yeah.
How do I put these three different factors together, and in what order? And we are the judge and jury of how the faith is constructed and what the ecclesiological character of the faith is, because the Church of England, as we've so famously said, is a coalition of different reformed entities, and you kind of make up your own
Well,
identikit.
well, but you see, for me, Gavin, that's not been painful because again, one of the other big issues that I've been of the last 12 months grappling with is the whole idea that what what the Church of England, I want to say Anglicanism, but I don't know what I mean when I say that anymore. I don't
You may,
quite know what I mean when
you
I
may
say
not know what you mean when you say the Church of England.
exactly. But one of the deficits it has is the lack of a magisterium,
Right.
and that shows itself in every way, in
Absolutely.
every single way.
Yeah.
And now it's not an issue.
Yeah.
It's not an issue. I don't have to decide my order of priorities because And this isn't a simple "I'm turning my brain off" issue. It's a much more
It's a pay
uh,
grade issue.
entering into the mystery of God's love and God's call to come to Him eternally.
Mm.
And actually, in the fog of all of that, in the darkness of it, I need to be guided
Mm.
because I can't make these decisions for myself,
Absolutely.
and
But
now I can be.
so you've described it beautifully. But so that's the relief, and that's how it ought to be. But nonetheless, I still. So I mean, like you, the magisterium was almost not exactly the final sticking point, but the need for it, the loss of it, the absence of it, the trauma of being without it, politically, all that stuff was solved the moment one accepted it. And it was a huge relief. But I think that there's a point, for me at any rate, it was the giving way of Anglicanism, and we'll talk about our bishop in common later on. It was the giving way of Anglicanism under my feet that had to happen to propel me from the relative comfort of make it up as you go along Anglicanism. There was a certain privilege to saying what kind of flavours my spirituality and my theology are going to be.
Yeah,
How,
sure.
am I going to be a Southwark South Bank liberal, putting the world to right, bringing in the socialist revolution with a bit of religion, or am I going to be a George Herbert somewhere in near South? We got to choose in a way,
Yep. Yeah, sure.
and it was almost not a shock of giving it up, but I've been talking to other Catholic friends saying, well, how many Anglicans are there coming out? Well, there's lots poised. You keep on. That's confidential. There are lots of people poised.
Yeah.
And so my friends are saying, well, why don't they come? And one of the things I've been saying is, well, they've got. I think they've got used to the privilege of making up their own mind. They are the authority in their lives, next to, along with, beyond God, and giving that act of surrender, although you described beautifully how wonderful it is, almost like surrendering to falling in love with somebody. I'm in their arms. This is a great place to be.
Yeah.
But you have to give up your
Yeah.
independence and autonomy to do it.
Well, I mean, I'm minded of one of the greatest releases for me of being ordained a bishop in the Church of England was it got me off the General Synod. A terribly dysfunctional body, completely lost its way. But I remember distinctly the great debates at the Synod at the time of the Covenant, And to be frank, whatever one might have thought of the whole idea of this covenant to hold the, inverted commas, Anglican communion together, it was the last show in town.
Mm.
And once that was not accepted, all of a sudden, there was no alternative, apart from everyone now makes up their own mind about whatever it is they want to decide.
Right.
And actually, that is just not possible.
Nor is it
the recipe for, listen to Jordan Peterson about things like, this is a recipe for anarchy.
Yes. Let's talk about the moment when, because I'd forgotten you were there in my egotism. Perhaps we won't give him his name; he's entitled to his privacy. But we shared a diocesan bishop at this stage, or we had shared. But he's a
indeed,
very, very good friend of yours, and I knew him and liked him very much, and respected him and his opinions. And we had this appalling synod debate. I think it was the one where the radicals came out and were unbelievably poisonous and beastly to the Catholic and the evangelical women who were saying, just give us a space where we can worship, please. And they use every trick in the book, all the standing off orders of synod and so on to deny them. And then worse, took delight. If I can just put in brackets, I went to the bus stop to go home, and there was a famous woman clergy person there, and we sat in the bus stop together, not quite talking to each other. And she said, we began to discuss a horrible thing, and I said, wasn't that terrible? And she said, yes, rightly so. I said, what do you mean, rightly so? It was the worst dynamics of any organisation, of any group I've ever been in my life. She said, well, she said, but you know why, don't you? And I said, no. She said, well, we were taking revenge on you. And I said, where does revenge belong in a Christian assembly? And she said, every single slight to any woman you or the others have ever made, we were holding you accountable for and taking revenge on you. And I said, look, I'm really sorry that's your pain and experience. But you must see that there is some incongruity between the feelings you may naturally have as a woman in the political context we have, and using a Christian assembly to do that. And she, not at all. Meanwhile, we were standing with our friend and perhaps at the time mentor, and he said these words, and I'd like to hear your reaction, because for me, I was much farther behind the curve than you were. And he said that as we kind of drew a deep breath and recovered from what had happened, this is the end of a 500-year-old ecumenical experiment.
Yeah.
And that it was a moment of shattering for me. I'd never ever thought of the Church of England in those terms. He clearly had. You clearly had. How long had you been thinking like that?
Well, this would have been in the late 90s, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose since the mid 90s. Well, as I was saying earlier, there was this. I'm not a single issue person. The question of the ordination of women has not been the one that has dictated my theological position within the Church of England about everything. It's been absolutely significant and very, very central. And of course, from the moment that it happened, by the way it happened, within dioceses, you've had this, you haven't had interchangeability of ministry. There have been some priests who couldn't celebrate everywhere. And, all of a sudden, one of the planks of a local church, the Presbyterian, is actually fractured. And it seems to me that that's been parked, and it's left parked, but it's got to be dealt with.
Yes.
because it is a flaw. It's one of those imperfections. When people of other communions look at the Church of England or Anglicanism, whatever we might mean, it's one of those things that prevents anything being reflected back to them that they can recognize. And there's this kind of ecclesial deficit that is present within the Church of England, and has been for a very long time, that doesn't deal with these core issues, but pretends that we can fudge them all the way around. And then you get the further fudge. So I think probably, you see, I grew up coming to faith at about 15. I grew up in a rarefied atmosphere within the Church of England, where ordinary, straightforward, parish Catholic worship was the staple diet. The Mass was central. All of the other issues that you would expect were given, and it was all accepted. And it wasn't until I went to theological college that I'd really encountered people of any other different spiritual tradition. I had in the deanery a bit, but I hadn't really engaged with them. And so basically, I grew up longing. So I came to faith in the 60s, the late 60s, when the ecumenical movement was pretty warm. There was a real hope that there might have been a way forward to heal some of the divisions of the last 600 years. The expectation was in the air. With Michael Ramsey and Paul VI, there was excitement and possibility. And I've lived and breathed that. But you see, over 30 or 40 years, nothing could be further from the agenda of the General Synod than the thought that we have to heal the divisions of the Church. And you see, part of the problem, it seems to me, began when whatever happened and whoever made the decision, they split what was then called the Board of Mission and Unity. It became Mission and Public Affairs, and Unity got left behind. Well, you can't do that. You can't do it because mission is that activity of the Godhead that holds the divine persons together. Unity is critical to mission. And it's the greatest scandal of the church that it's disunited. And so I've lived with this whole idea that we must become one. And over the 30 or 40 years that have intervened, I have watched gradually, inexorably, the Church of England just simply park issues and think we can deal with it. We are diverse. We can hold together. Well, there comes a time when you can't. You can't. And that's where I got to, you know?
That's a very clear way of describing it. Wouldn't it be true to say that because the Church of England was a coalition, let's say for the moment, of three ecclesiologies, three spiritualities, the Protestant, sacramental, and sort of Erastian pragmatists in the middle, whatever we want to call them, liberals, but and because the Church of England, we know, is both congregational and episcopal, it just is. But there was a danger, wasn't there, that each of us in our congregational bubbles imagined the rest of the Church of England was just like us, but a bit different.
Yeah.
But actually, it wasn't like A, it wasn't much like us, and B, it was radically different. And so it was only when these three warring factions came together, which they would do in synod. Synod was where the amphitheatre where it happened. That, if you like, I suppose reality broke in because although the congregational spirituality, the worship ought to be more important, it was built on something, and this is why I think our Episcopal mentor had it right, and you'd come to have it right, and I hadn't. It wasn't sustainable. The whole creation of Anglicanism was an attempt to avoid civil war, to mend rupture on one side of the. But the price was that there was no coherence, no magisterium, no real thing, just different groups of people getting along together until they met when they didn't.
Yeah. I remember, I was not a great fan of the synod. In fact, I never spoke.
Very wise.
But I did, however, put in to make my maiden speech and a debate in 2004 over a thing called mission-shaped church.
I remember it well. Halcyon days.
Now, normally, anyone putting in to make their maiden speech is called, no matter how many people are wanting to speak in this debate. And I was steadfastly ignored by the chair all the way through the debate, and I stood right in front of him.
Right, how awful.
And I was steadfastly ignored. Now, here was someone at the time, I had been a diocesan missioner. I was teaching missiological ecclesiology, if there's such a thing, in the university in Chichester, and part of a master's program, wanting to speak about mission. Now, I'm not an expert, and I'm not blessed with the greatest theological mind, but I'm not silly. And I thought I had some things that the synod could have benefited from hearing. Now, the fact that I'd put in to speak against the report, and in particular out of something you've just said about, because one of the things the report said was things like Sunday worship were now peripheral. Holy places, peripheral. The importance of Sunday as a day of the Lord, peripheral. Now, the whole thing was based on a misunderstanding of the nature of mission and the fact that mission could actually become church planting, you know?
Mm.
And I mean, it was just way off beam. And the trouble is that ever since, it seems to me, and I've not been on the synod, and I haven't paid detailed attention to the debates because it's been great not to be part of them. But it seems to me that every attempt to have a conversation about the shape of the church since then has failed to ask the fundamental questions. And for me, they are: what is the gospel? How is it best lived and proclaimed? And what is the role of the bishop and those he leads as a unit, the local church, in the furtherance of that mission and the development of that ministry?
Well, having said you're not a theologian, you just expressed with theological acuity exactly the part of it. But what you were doing, of course, is you're representing quite rightly the sacramental, ecclesiological heart of the church. But what they were doing, if I can call them they were doing sociology. They were doing, how does the organization work? How can we fix a program that meets people where they are
Yep.
and makes them behave in a sociologically more impressive way for an organization?
And that's why I've despaired over any hope that there might be a reconciliation between different communions, let's
Yeah.
be as vague as that, in the structures of the Church of England, because the synod is not any longer structured and shaped in order to have those conversations, but rather the sociological, political ones. And it just won't happen. It
No,
can't happen. It will not find space on synodical agendas. Now, whether the synod is equipped to have that conversation is another matter, but it won't even get on the agenda.
well, it can't, partly because the liberals are always much more interested in politics than we were. And so they do it better. They turn up to more meetings. They learn the standing orders when you and I are trying to learn the catechism.
Yes,
And therefore they tend to run synod. And the problem, I think, that was the beginnings of something that's widened, which was either you convert the country or the country converts you. And you and I belonged to part of the spirituality of the church who was wanted to convert the country. And,
absolutely.
and they had been converted already by the country. And they've won. And that's why the Church of England no longer has a soul.
Well,
And
I hesitate to say this, Gavin, to you because you're much more attuned to this and able to speak a bit than I am. But for me, the problem has its origin in the Enlightenment, in that gospel and culture have got to be in dialogue with each other. They've got to be, because the culture is the conduit through which you have to proclaim the gospel. And you can't do it if you're not engaged with the culture. But the problem was, post Enlightenment, increasingly, what's happened is that people have confused the conduit and made it the gospel itself.
absolutely.
You know, you can't proclaim the gospel apart from within the culture.
Now, hang on.
The culture is not the gospel.
Yes, but this is about to become extremely interesting because we're going to move from being nostalgic to prophetic, I hope, because um, what you said is exactly right. And one of the reasons why I jump up and down energetically now as a Catholic, as people talk about Vatican II, the spirit of Vatican II, the implications of it, what was Pope Francis doing, what's Pope Leo going to do, what do the German progressive bishops think they're doing, I come and say, along with John Ford, I've been living and breathing these tensions for 50 years. You're talking about ecclesiology and the culture. And one of the things that I'm trying to understand, I think, in terms of, and I'm moving towards thinking about the Latin Mass movement, is that whereas during our lifetimes, and isn't this the problem Vatican II had? Whereas during our lifetimes, you and I thought there was a dialogue to be had between the church and the culture, and we hoped to restrain the culture, to convert it, to sanctify it, to cooperate with it. Hasn't it become so virulently anti-Christian that actually one of the reasons why the TLM is flourishing is because that the thing that you and I have tried to do for good professional intellectual reasons is proving not to be possible anymore.
Yeah.
The culture is so anti-Christian, so far away that we can't even get it to repent. We have to get it to revert, so to speak.
Yeah.
We need to say, well, there are now two cultures. There's Christendom, there's Catholic culture, and there's whatever this decadent thing you're doing is. And frankly, you're going to have to give up, a bit like the early Christians.
Yeah.
The catechumens would arrive and they would say, but you're too enculturated in paganism to understand the mysteries yet. You can't come in until we think we've formed your mind in a way that when you encounter the sacrifice of the Mass, you'll be able to go, oh, that's lovely, rather than, oh, I'm not having to do with that.
Yeah.
Haven't we got to that? I mean, so basically, I think you and I have got things to say within Catholicism, because I think it's still trying to do what the Anglican Church did, which is to find ways of engaging with the culture to make it receptive to the gospel. And I think that may not be possible anymore.
Well, I mean, I don't want to knock everything that the Church of England did at all in that. I mean, there were some good things that came out of, the whole business of the decade for evangelization and the synod debates about mission-shaped church and all the rest of it. But because of the lack of an understanding of the need for a magisterium, which somehow or other gives the shape to that which you are called to live and proclaim. It puts boundaries around it. It can't just be a jelly-like blob that flops around all over the place. Without that, there's not a chance.
Right.
Now, I think there must still be a chance with the magisterium for
That's interesting, right?
for shaping the life and witness of the pilgrim people of God within. For me, the key is a diocese. Really, that's and this is my experience in Australia coming out. I had to create something out of nothing. There was nothing. So what is a diocese? It's a group of disciples of Jesus Christ on their march towards heaven with their bishop. You don't need anything else. Water.
Tell that to the Diocese of Sydney.
Bread and wine, the Bible, the bishop, disciples. You've got what you need. And how do you shape yourself to make that journey? Now, I think, I've been a Roman Catholic for 3 weeks, but I think the shape is still there for local churches within Catholic dioceses. No, the local church of the Catholic diocese and its particular expression parochially to be shaped in such a way that they can live and proclaim the gospel. I've been a great fan of Robert Barron for years. And now it seems to me that there is something there that he's not despairing necessarily. He's wanting to challenge the culture, and he's wanting to stand up and have the argument that needs to be had, and he seems to be precisely and eloquently able to do so. But without that engagement, it's just not going to happen.
Yes, I'm probably being too blunt when I talk about secular culture, because it's obviously far more gradated than that and nuanced. So yes, you're clearly right. And Robert Barron is doing, as a Catholic, things we wanted to do as sacramentally minded Anglicans in a very effective way. So yeah, I'm sure that's an important modification to my polarized dualism. He does do it well.
But, the bottom line for me, Gavin, is that, okay, too simple. Yes, okay, it's simple. But Mary gave birth to one Jesus, and there has to be one church.
Let me provoke you a little bit. Do you think, can I provoke you to the point of saying that retrospectively the Protestant Reformation was a mistake?
No, not entirely. Because, of course, it's not been without its effect on Roman Catholicism. in terms of the way that it has reflected and acted in response to. So not entirely.
Mistake God used then to refresh his church.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I we're back to something you referred to right at the very beginning. As far as I am concerned, since coming to faith at the age of 15, I have been a Catholic. Now, I have been an Anglican Catholic, not an Anglo, an Anglican Catholic. Now, adjectives and nouns are very, very important. The primary is a Catholic, described as Anglican. Now, I believe I've been that throughout my entire Christian formation. I now have to say that I've been received into full communion, as the bishop said at the reception, with the Catholic Church. Not with the Roman Catholic Church, with the Catholic Church. Now, but the Catholic Church is one and can only be one. And therefore, before, it hasn't been one, although I have longed for it to be one. And I think there were things there are things within Anglican polity that could bring renewal, life, different approaches to the one Catholic Church of the West. Now, to say nothing of the East, of course.
Ooh. Hang on. Can you? This is so interesting. I don't want. Can I? Do you want to go on, or can I just put a bracket thing? Because you've said two things, and I want us to be able to deal with them both, if possible, without a senior moment making me forget them.
Okay.
So first of all, this explains, I think, why your shuffle as opposed to my trapeze jump, because you were always closer. And I think, as an Anglican, I've no doubt at all. I think you were much closer to, or you actually were a Catholic living in close proximity and close imitatory effectiveness, as Anglo-Catholicism did. So that, in a sense, that partly explains the difference between our trajectories. And I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter what I was, but I was more compartmentalized than you were. I had bits of evangelical, bits of charismatic, bits of Eastern Orthodox, bits of Catholic medieval mysticism. They all kind of jumbled together in a smorgasbord, and I had to find a way of placing them within within a magisterium, within a single ecclesial whole. I think you were already structurally formed to do that from the beginning in the way that I wasn't, and that's partly why you take this much more attractive view of saying, I wasn't very far from home. I'm shuffling over the threshold. There's no earthquake. This is just the natural outcome of everything I've always believed, and I'm in a firmer place. And I people like that. It's very, very respectful to everybody concerned. They don't quite like my more traumatic, polarized frothing around. But I think the reason is that I was living in the more Protestantized areas of Anglicanism, and so I think I've seen the horrors of them, or the contradictions. Obviously, the graces, because of course there are graces. But that's the second point that I want you to talk about in a moment, because I think it's probably one of the most important things we could talk about, which is how we take the graces of Anglicanism and reoffer them for the renewal of the one church. But for the moment, not to justify myself, but to say there are other journeys back to Rome. The incoherence and the contradictions and the anarchy, the dysfunctionality of the further end of Protestantism away from where you were is something that I'm reacting against. And so I'm one of the reasons why I'm less nice retrospectively.
Well, I don't want to suggest that the synodical structures of the Church of England are the source of all difficulties, because they're not. But they do contain within themselves some of the things that have got the potential for making one very angry over
Yes.
these matters.
Yes.
For
Absolutely.
instance, no names, no pack drill. There was a member of the General Synod who had become, in their words, a member of the Church of England, not through any sacramental or ecclesial reception, but simply because that's what suited. I think probably had been baptized, but where I don't know. Had certainly never been confirmed, but had become, in their words, a member of the Church of England, and within 6 months was elected to the General Synod, and was spouting in the General Synod um, uh, opinions and strange ideas that were being presented and have become almost accepted.
Mm.
And that voice is given almost the same weight as the voice of any bishop,
This
which
isn't somebody
seems pathetic.
who headed up an agency of any kind, is it? I'm just thinking of the people who've made who've made noises and effectively without seeming to have any roots. Doesn't matter, as you say, no names, no pack.
But you see, that I can see what you're saying about this person was coming from this extreme, community church background,
Yeah,
frankly,
yeah.
and yet have got themselves placed within. And this was just, I mean, I couldn't understand it. I didn't understand where they were coming from. I mean, but it's got it, but it's that kind of issue that gets multiplied and factionalized and given huge weight
I
in
think
the arguments that have developed.
this is part of the resentment that inevitably you and I felt as we did synod, and felt that we were, if I may say so, to some extent, we were the grown-ups who knew what ecclesiology ought to be like, and thought the General Synod could, if it behaved itself, manage to serve ecclesiology. But actually, because the person that you've talked about and others like them had an equal voice and an equal presence and an equal vote, but no sense at all
No.
of the organic growth of sacramental ecclesiology that you represented to greatly, and me a little bit. So I think that was part of the incoherence. Although I'm talking, I mean, it's kind of you to root my dissatisfaction in synodal anarchy, but it was further stretched than that. I remember. Well, mustn't become old buffers in a pub, but the story is too good to miss. I remember when I was at theological college, I was teaching the brethren how the liturgy. Unlike you, I went to, I'm not saying it's by mistake, but I went to the most Protestant and the most evangelical theological college that there was for several reasons. And the principal came up to me one day and said, "Well, this has been very nice, Gavin. Thank you for doing this particular liturgy. What's the next one?" And I said, "Well, not finished yet. His name was David. He's dead. He's no one's going to look him up. I said, no, it's not finished yet, David. There's a bit more to go." No, he said, "You have finished." No, I said, "There's the Agnus Dei to go." "Ah," he said, "we don't do that here." I said, but it's in the book, David. It's it's the liturgy. You teach liturgy, David. You know it's in the book better than I do. Yes, no, but we don't do that here. I said, "Well, you'll need to explain to me. I mean, I've only been here 18 months. Why don't we do that here, David?" "Well," he said, and then looking as though we were talking about, I don't know, masturbation or something, pornography, something really awful and rude, he said, "Well, some of the brethren might get the impression there is a closer connection between the bread and the wine and the Lord of our Saviour than there actually is. We don't do that here." And I said, "David, as a principal of a theological college in the Church of England, who gives you the authority to decide which bits of the liturgy we do and which we don't do?" "This is the end of the conversation," he said. And I only use it. I mean, he was a lovely man, very holy, very nice. I liked him a lot. I don't mean to criticize him. I only tell the story because it's emblematic to me of the kind of the chaos,
Yeah.
the conceptual, theological, sacramental chaos. So it wasn't just this shooting from the hip man from the community church. The evangelicals were just as
Yeah.
antithetic to any sense of sacramental coherence.
Yeah.
How do you make a system like that work?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Tell me about what we bring, the good stuff, that in some kind of creative tension has the Holy Spirit has been generous enough to form. I haven't thought this through very carefully. When people ask me, I resort rather superficially to saying, "Well, we did poetry very well. We had Donne and Herbert, and we do really really nice hymns, and you do awful hymns. And it's about time you learn to sing, and b you learn some decent poetry and hymns. But I know this is a superficial. This is not enough. Tell me more. Tell us more about what you think the Anglican polity, the graces of the Anglican polity are that can be for the help of the Catholic Church, because undoubtedly the fact there was a Reformation has wounded Catholicism, because so many of the graces of the Holy Spirit got diverted into other projects instead of belonging in the one church.
Well, I think the parochial, the holy person resident within a community, serving the community for its own sake, on a manageable, recognizable scale, is the main one. The pastoral ministry of the holy person, the priest, the parson, for me, that kind of pastoral ministry is right at the heart of good Anglican theology. And it's where the theology of Anglicanism should be being done.
So should we see Roman Catholic priests in cassocks walking the streets of the parishes, going to town council, being in the fishing church? Is that what you're talking?
Well, I think so. I just need to be a bit careful. There was a thing called the Anglican Conference on Evangelism, they'd have called it, that I went to as diocesan missioner, and there was a priest from the Diocese of London, actually, who gave a contribution about Catholic evangelism at that. And the basic contention of this priest was that they wore their cassock and went to the pub. Now, I think there's more to it than that.
It's not a bad place to start.
But it's not a bad place to start, indeed. Indeed. So, it's something about, well, you see, with the best interpretation of some of the early base communities in Central America, where a priest would go and would embed himself in the life of the community.
The bits of liberation theology they got right, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. But the first task was to go and embed in the community and be there as the leaven in the lump and the salt in the dough, etc., etc. And there's one of them, and I can't remember which it is, but who tells the story of when they first went to this little fishing village. They went and they sat on the harbour side with the fishermen and their nets, and they got to know each other, and they told each other all kinds of stories and stories about their lives. And he began to tell them stories not only about his life, but about the story that had made an impact on his life, and so introduced the scriptures and the Gospels in particular. And they engaged in, over a period of time, some wonderful encounters about some of the stories about Jesus. And he tells this story in his book where he says, we were engaging with a discussion about the teaching of Jesus that when someone takes your coat, give him your tunic as well. What on earth does that mean in this context?
Yeah.
And he said it was the beginning of real engagement with this community.
Yes.
And he said one man simply said, I know exactly what it means. What it means is when the revolution comes, as it must, they will not only give us our boats back, but they will call back from their numbered Swiss bank accounts all the money that they've made with us. Now, he says there's a political point. Yes, of course, but that was the point at which he was then able to engage, because that's where it really pinched for them.
Yeah.
And to grow from that little mustard seed, a community of faith that became established eventually in that fishing village. So I think there's something about Anglicanism at its best, and it's related to George Herbert. It's related to that. He does this for a task, is whatever that hymn is. I can't now. It's gone straight out of my head.
Yes.
It's related to that. It's also the pastoral, the exercise of pastoral ministry is also a particular way of doing theology as well, which is not just academia. And I think that's part of Anglicanism that could find a route. And I hesitate to say this because I'm not entirely persuaded that it's correct. But the whole idea of a married Presbyterian, I think it does bring another dimension.
That's very interesting. We might talk about it or talk about it later. I'd just like to go back to your Herbertian view of pastoral ministry. I'm sure that's right. It's what I tried to do as university chaplain. One of the things I did was there's a group of eminent Nobel Prize winning biologists who used to meet in the Arts Centre pub, and they would hang around to wait for the chaplain to come so they could bait him. I mean, they would have a few pints of beers. They'd let's have fun with the chaplain, and the chaplain would walk in, and then they would imagine in. I mean, they were very, very good biologists, but they were clever boys who, at the age of 11, had never had a further philosophical thought.
Yeah.
It wasn't true of physicists. It was true, but it was true of biologists. And so there was. The reason I say that was in case I pretend that I was as clever as they were. Of course, I wasn't. But on the other hand, there were bits of thinking about the human condition that they hadn't bothered with, and that they'd got stuck with. And so, as we merrily drunk, and they sought to have the sort of the fun of the hunt, something better happened over time. And one of the things that happened was when they started to die, they began to ask the chaplain to do their funeral, because a community had developed, and the biologists really hadn't developed any. I say liturgy is the wrong word, but they hadn't developed any corporate communal ritual of managing death. And so, if the chaplain was trustworthy enough, they would borrow. They're willing to borrow. Those are different stories. Rather than do nostalgia, let's do about the present. I think part of the problem for the Catholic community at the moment is that we've beaten them into submission socially. They've never come back from the Test Acts and the period when they were expelled, and they've been sitting as almost immigrant guests on the edge of society, while the Anglican vicar has taken all the prizes. And so, one of the things I've been trying to say, from the perspective you've announced, is that this would have been quite difficult if Anglicanism was still robust. It would have been competitive. But since there are no Anglican vicars in catechics in pubs anymore, there are instead mainly middle-aged women doing part-time social work in churches. Don't mean to be rude, but that's part of it. There's a lot of scope for what you've just been describing. There's a vacuum.
Yes,
and I think Catholic parish priests and Catholic parishes should move into the vacuum that the Church of England has left, now that that group we were talking about took over the church from us and created a sociological organization of people doing things in places that were holy but aren't anymore. There's a huge space, and I would hope that the bishops of the Catholic Church in England and Wales would say, would catch up with the fact that this is their opportunity.
Yeah. Now, I having only been 3 weeks in, I can't speak about this in any detail at all. But I do know that the Bishop of Arundel and Brighton is actually doing a renewal. I don't like to call it a structural renewal because I think it's more than that. But he is beginning to shape the diocese in units that have got an effectiveness about them that is not just a way of operating, but a much more dynamic way of being disciples in order to engage with exactly what we're trying to do. Now,
Yeah.
I think I sense that that's part of what he's trying to do. I hope so, because I'm sure you're right, because it's there.
Yes, they need a Catholic alpha. I was again. I don't mean to drop names, but I was sitting on the edge of Mont Saint Michel with the abbot, who is of course doesn't own the abbey anymore. It's owned by the French state, and he's given
Yes,
permission to inhabit a few rooms there. So he's not as important as it sounds. But we were looking over the valley in front of us, and he was saying we desperately need a Catholic alpha. We have to take with energy and with presence and commitment and resources the things that we've left to the Protestants in the past, because this is no longer our society we can infuse by calling people back to their roots. The roots have withered, and I think it's true in France. It's true in a different way here. But the Catholic Church was, it seems to me, was allowed in as a concession, historically, politically, theologically, and it's existed on the edge of society for our lifetimes, while you and I, got to take center stage.
yeah,
But the stage hasn't collapsed, but there's no Christian presence, notably, on it. And the largest ecclesial, and it's not just about largest, but largest and the most authentic, is the Catholic Church, and it needs to stretch its legs and grow its ambitions, I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we've got people, we will have mutual friends who are going to be listening to us, listening to the old Buffers Reflect. What would you say to those people who are still looking over the garden wall, thinking, is this a party that I can join? I have to leave so much behind. It costs, whether it's the independent autonomy of the mind or the club, the friends, the reunions, the familiar culture. What would you say to people if some other version of "Come in the Water" is very nice?
Well, there is no need for pretense. There is no need for defense. There is no need for flag waving, even. That actually under the umbrella of the one Catholic Church, there is a home for everybody. And I have found that personally
Mm.
very emotionally and intellectually challenging. I mean, you're right, there are constraints, but there always have been.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, why should we be free? Well, we're not. I mean, the whole business of freedom. No, let's not go down freedom. I was thinking the other day about whether there's a difference in approach. They're two sides of the one coin.
Mm.
There's kind of justice and mercy. And it would seem to me, by emphasis, there's far more about justice within superficial Anglicanism. But there's so much more about mercy. And in the end, it's God's mercy that allows us to be just.
Mm. Mm.
Or we become more merciful by being just, or more just by becoming merciful. And it's bigger, it's gracious, it's wider, it's broader, and it's natural and normal.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it's inadequate. It's inadequate, but that's what I'm finding. It's what I'm finding.
It's a normality that I thought ought to exist somewhere in the church, but
Yeah,
suddenly here it is.
yes, yes.
there was, there was a lovely moment. I mean, this is not a good example at all, but one of my happiest moments was at an annual general meeting of the parish, which happens to be the cathedral in Shrewsbury. And the very competent dean, they're more like curates than experienced apparatchiks as we have in our system. But nonetheless, the very competent dean stood up and talked to a full congregation about the business. And then one or two people tried to be Anglicans and say, we'd like to discuss this. And we'd like to introduce a note of sort of creative dissension for debate. And, my heart went, oh, God, no, please, no. And then the dean said, no, do as you're told. I'm not doing that. Not up for discussion. And I just went, yes, coherence, clarity, community, authority, but benign, it's of course benign dictatorship, but then when we're not trying to sort the world out, it's just the church. It was such a relief that we weren't going to do the politicking. We were just going to be pastorally, responsibly led in a relationship of mutual accountability. And this attempt to turn the church into a corrosive parliamentary model was a moment of wondrousness. Then the other day we had Vespers, and Vespers was before Mass in the evening. So Mass was at 6, Vespers was at 5. And as we were singing Vespers, I'm part of the choir, the church slowly filled with shadowy figures who knelt to pray the rosary and begin with a dozen and then 2 dozen and then 3 dozen. And I remember, and I hope I'm not being tribal. It's not the intention at all. I remember thinking, I never saw this. This wouldn't have happened in any of the Anglican churches I've been in, because there wasn't the rosary. There wasn't an agreed spirituality that everybody lived and breathed and was part of it. There were different spiritualities. There's just something wonderfully coherent, natural, as you say, that I can relax. This is, it's unfolding as it should. Could be deeper, could be more intense, could be more whatever. But the paradigm, the structure, the identity.
Yeah. I'm minded of a conversation within the cathedral community when I was precentor at the Diocesan Cathedral, about worship, and the tension that there were a number of people, perhaps particularly the then dean, who was of the opinion that you had to have a particular, what he would call, traditional Anglican liturgy, Eucharistic liturgy, because most of the members of the congregation at the cathedral came because they were refugees from parishes that no longer provided this.
Mm.
And I said, well, that's really interesting, but actually the cathedral is supposed to be the centre of mission for the bishop. And therefore it should be a place of excellence. And in terms of excellence, liturgical excellence is being the best we possibly can within the liturgy provided by the church today, and offering that worship to the best of our ability. And I said, we're not a parish church.
Mm.
We have a foundation here. The Mass will be offered. Whether there's anyone in the congregation or not is actually immaterial, because we are here to offer the very best we can. And I said, do you know, if we were doing that, I've got a kind of feeling that the nave would fill up with people who wanted to just drift around the edge of it for a while, who wanted to come and be drawn into it, into a depth, rather than come to us as refugees looking for a particular style. Because I think that's what the Eucharistic family is supposed to be about, offering the very best.
The wonderful thing about what you've described is, of course, it's Catholic sacramentalism, with the Mass as being the objective reality to which everything responds and resonates. And so, that you were expressing Catholic theology, Catholic ecclesiology. and the problem where you had was that there were three or four competitive ideas within Anglicanism, and you were having to fight for that corner without any,
Yeah.
you couldn't be guaranteed to win the debate because you were right.
No, but it's self-evidently, if it were actually produced, the goods would follow.
Yes,
But
yes.
that's part of the sacramental understanding, of course.
But that's what it is to be a Catholic, and that's why, again, I think one of the reasons why Catholicism, and traditional Catholicism at that, is beginning to make a small but significant impact on the young, is that they've had a surfeit of the
Yes.
subjectivity that your competitors in this cathedral
Yeah.
debate were talking about.
Yeah.
We need to meet the needs of the people.
Yeah.
No, not at all. The people need to respond to the mass, and it's an entire change in the locus of
Yeah.
what we used to
But I
when we
think,
were
you see,
talking.
that's direct, because that can be applied not within the beauty of the cathedrals, which of course we're talking about buildings that don't really belong to the Church of
I
England.
was going to say they are Catholic cathedrals. Yes,
But
the joke is that it was a Catholic building, and you were enunciating Catholic theology, and the other tenants didn't get any of that.
but I'm reminded of, we used to go to France a lot. I mean, I know you live in France some of the time, and we used to go every year, 3 or 4 times a year. And on one occasion, we were exploring the Haute Savoie, and the kids were, I don't know, 7, 9, and 11, or maybe a bit older, but they'd probably been churched out.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, we were driving around and we came across this sign to the Abbey at Tanier. And I thought, I wonder if I can get away with it. And in the end, we were going closer and closer. And all of a sudden, I was very conscious that we were not alone, that there were lots of cars. Well, relatively a number of cars. And so as we got closer and closer, we were clearly part of a small procession of cars. And I suddenly thought, is it the 15th of August? Have I missed a major feast here somehow or other? But no, this group of people, I discovered after it had happened, more or less every day, left work, went in for the midday office, and they sat as the community, sang the midday office beautifully. They then socialized in the courtyard outside with the community before the community went off and had their lunch, and they jumped in their cars and went home for their own lunch.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized that there's something about the committed character of the core disciples at the heart of an act of worship, that living it simply, directly, appropriately, and without embarrassment will draw others to itself.
And it's partly because of its clarity. What you've described is the outworking, the effervescence of the monastic life, where the offices are sung and people graduate towards. You described earlier on the priest as being the holy person. This is the holy community in the
Yep.
holy building with
Yep.
the holy mass, and as you quite rightly say, it's proof of what you were arguing in the people gravitate towards it, and then it's not spoilt by people saying, "Well, I wonder if we could have a bit of messy church at the end."
Yeah, that's
Or,
right. That's right.
are the constituencies that feel excluded here? That's just not. The whole thing is the telescope is put the right way round, and it works.
Yes, I mean, Yes, the tail wags the dog so often, I'm afraid, in many of the discussions and debates that I've been used to.
Yeah.
And I was greatly freed from these when I went to Australia, because, I mean, the difference in Australia is that basically each diocese has to pass the legislation that the General Synod passes, and until it does, it's not effective in that diocese.
Ooh, that's interesting.
So it's very much more the local church.
Yes.
And we were free to do all kinds of stuff that the synodical constraints in England as it's developed don't permit dioceses to do. Although, if only dioceses would actually challenge that, it might be. But still, that's
So
not.
it was a triumph of the Episcopal model over the parliamentary model, and as again, the closer you get to real church, the more it works.
Yeah, but we had the ability to kind of shape it properly without too much fuss, really.
John, we've been talking an hour, and that's probably enough for most people. And although the things I'd love to have another conversation about the married priesthood, and not because I want to extend the synodality of Pope Francis, but because it'd be very interesting to see what you say. I haven't made up my mind about it at all. I mean, I
haven't either.
It's not, and again, it's not for me to make my mind up about the church
No.
teaching this, and I'm very happy with it. But on the other hand, I don't see any. Perhaps we can put it under the banner of synodality and accompaniment and walking together and talking about it.
Well, it's been a great conversation, Gavin. I don't know whether people enjoy it or not, but there we are.
Well, they may not listen to it. I've loved it. I've loved every minute of it. John, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you so much. And we were watching each other on over the hills and mix of Facebook occasionally, and we get in contact. But this has been really marvelous.
It has. So nice keep in touch. It would be lovely.
In the same, thank you. We certainly will. And
okay.
God bless you, and thank you for the conversation.
And you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye now.